Hey everybody, Spooky Marshmallow here, and today I have an interesting tale to tell. The Rufus Cantrell scandal. Ooh, juicy, and it is, let me tell you. This is something that I just recently found out about. It takes place in Indianapolis, Indiana. I was born and raised there and never heard of this in my life for the entire time I lived there. I don't currently live there, but I used to live there. Like my whole life I lived there. I've only lived in Kentucky now for not even a year, so hey, never even heard of this until recently, and I accidentally stumbled upon it, and I'm like, what? Why did I not know about this? All right, so let's get to it. The Rufus Cantrell scandal, or as his nickname was, the King of Ghouls. Let's find out why. Picture it. Indianapolis, late 1800s. Rufus Cantrell and his mother Sarah moved north from Galatian, Tennessee to Indianapolis around 1892. When Cantrell was about 16, Sarah later testified to a jury that Bateman Cantrell, his father, had died in an insane asylum. Her testimony, however, came while defense lawyers were trying to get Rufus declared mentally ill himself. Sarah is his mother. Sarah's sister Harriet was also crazy and had to be taken to an asylum. Rufus, she said, was subject to fits and spasms, known to be epilepsy. As a kid, he was supposedly thrown off a horse, landing on his head and shoulders. When he was a boy, he tried to preach and said he had talked with God. Sometimes he would have mad spells and become very violent and profane. This is all coming from Sarah, by the way. In 1896, the 20-year-old tried to kill himself out of love sickness. At the time of his first appearance in the Indianapolis Press, however, in 1899, he was making a name for himself as a showman. The Indianapolis Recorder advertised that Cantrell, who could recite long passages of the Bible on stage, was giving a talk on the history of playing cards and Cain's wife at Oddfellows Hall, along with a juvenile quartet, all of whose members were under the age of 12. He then went on to do a show in Cincinnati. Cantrell tried to become a teenage evangelist. That's interesting. So he was talking about Cain's wife, but also he gave a talk about the history of playing cards. Yeah, I see how the two go together. In 1897, he joined the 24th U.S. Infantry, but was discharged a year later at Fort Douglas, Utah, due to epilepsy and suicidal incantations. Back in Indy, Cantrell got a job at the Malleable Iron Works, then as an undertaker's assistant, working for C.M.C. Willis, the first African-American undertaker in Indiana. His second appearance in the paper was October 1900. He was stirring up a fight at a bar in Bucktown, a black neighborhood along the canal, today the site of IUPUI. The source of the trouble? Cantrell's support for the presidential campaign of William Jennings Bryan. By the summer of 1902, he had gotten involved with a ring of medical men based at a rather infamous school just east of Bucktown, the Central College of Physicians and Surgeons. This training school for white doctors stood at 212 North Senate Avenue, now the site of the Indiana Government Center's parking garage. Nice. Oddly, for a medical facility engaged in the highly illegal practice of body snatching, yeah. The college's fourth-floor dissecting rooms, used for anatomical instruction, sat directly across from the State House. The corner of Ohio and Senate was a bit of a healthcare complex back then. The Protestant Deaconess Hospital sat immediately south of Central College. Another med school, Indiana Medical College, stood at the corner of Market Street and Senate Avenue, today the site of the Firefighters Memorial. You could have tossed a stone from any of these buildings into the legislature. And the reason why I am going into details about this is just to let you know how close they were in proximity, because all of them participated in the body snatching. Yes. During the early days of modern medical science, instructors and students usually relied on the public hangman to deliver educational goods. The public hangman. Yes, it was a thing. American medical facilities had to steal them until laws slowly made it easier to acquire bodies in the 1800s. Laws that were by no means universal. Resurrectionists is what they were called. Caused plenty of conflict and outrage, as you can imagine. In 1788, an anonymous riot broke out in New York after doctors at Columbia College robbed an African American burial ground in Manhattan. In the British Isles, body snatching grew so bad that cages had to be erected over fresh graves. Sometimes families kept the dead under guard until decomposition rendered the remains useless. In rural America, revolver battles broke out between burglars and posses of farmers. By 1900, as Americans learned the extent of resurrectionist activities, cremation was emerging as one surefire preventative measure against ending up in the slush bucket of a dissection room. Yikes. In 1878, Indianapolis's own Benjamin Harrison, future U.S. president, helped investigate the disappearance of the body of a young man named Augustus Devon. Now, Devon had died of TB a short time before Harrison's own father, Ohio Senator John Scott Harrison, died. Both were buried in the Harrison family plot outside Cincinnati. When John Harrison Jr., armed with a search warrant, showed up at Ohio Medical College to look for the missing Devon, he was shocked to find his own father naked and hanging from a rope in an air shaft, where he'd been quickly hidden by staff. Devon eventually turned up pickled in a vat of brine at the University of Michigan. Race was a huge factor in grave robbing. Teams of grave robbers and the target of their ghoulish work were most often African American. Their employers, however, were universally white physicians. Shocker. In Indiana, however, white corpses showed up on dissecting room tables with more frequency than down south. Remains nabbed from potter's fields, burial grounds for paupers, and cemeteries connected to mental asylums like Central State Hospital were unlikely to be missed. Yet Hoosier resurrectionists also swept through dozens of urban and rural graveyards. In Michigan and northern Indiana, grave robbing was worse in towns close to the Michigan Central Railroad and its branch lines, since bodies could quickly be hidden on trains and shipped as freight to Ann Arbor's famous medical school. Some cemeteries had been particularly emptied out by medical pickers. Indianapolis's oldest downtown burial grounds, Greenlawn, a cemetery that literally died, was declared defunct largely because so many of the corpses interred there had been spirited away. Yes, true. They picked that graveyard clean. An article from the Indianapolis Journal in October of 1899 describes the problem and how ghouls covered their tracks. Before winter term opened at the new medical college on Senate Avenue in September of 1902, Rufus Cantrell and his gang of ghouls, employed by Dr. Joseph C. Alexander, a prominent white doctor who grew up in neighboring Hamilton County, scoured many Hoosier cemeteries, making quick nocturnal work of fresh burials. During a sensational trial beginning in October of 1902, the 27-year-old Cantrell turned state's witness, spilling information right and left in an attempt to take down Dr. Alexander and get his own prison sentence reduced. Prosecutors and defense lawyers alike questioned the accuracy of Cantrell's confessions, which were thrown into further doubt by declarations of his epilepsy and insanity. But as he led police investigators on personal tours of central Indiana graveyards, where he and other ghouls had been at work, empty coffins turned up everywhere. Chicago police even called him in to shed light on grave robbing in the Windy City. Like many criminals, Cantrell liked a good show and the public attention he was getting. Some of his confessions were probably cooked up, yet he did give prosecutors key details on how American resurrectionists operated. Mourners would have been shocked to discover that on some occasions coffins carried out to graveyards were full of ice. Yeah, ice blocks. The deceased had been nabbed way before the burial. Other times, grieving families had hardly left the cemetery grounds when grave robbers, posing as grave diggers, snatched the corpses, hid them in sacks, then threw dirt over caskets containing only air. Very sad. Graves decorated with floral wreaths were usually left untouched, since ghouls considered the flowers too elaborate to reconstruct after disturbing the grave. Often forced to dispose of wagon load of the dead, ghouls were known to dump them in Indianapolis alleyways. Yet the staff of Central College itself might have been the culprit. When October 13th, 1902, two stiffs tied up in sacks and hidden in a dry goods box were found sitting at the corner of Georgia and Meridian Street outside a department store. Wow. Two others turned up outside the college's back door. However, Cantrell was already on trial. Greenlawn, located on Kentucky Avenue, not far from the college, wasn't the only target. As the trial continued, police discovered that Mount Jackson Cemetery, located next to Central State Hospital on West Washington Street, no longer really deserved to be called a cemetery. Cantrell's team, and probably others over the years, also targeted the German Catholic Cemetery. Anderson Cemetery in Irvington was hit, and country churchyards at Traders Point in Elwood, Fairmont, and central Indiana towns. A dubious letter arrived during the trial, accusing Cantrell of having plotted to steal the body of ex-President Benjamin Harrison himself. Now, Harrison died in 1901, and he was buried at Crown Hill. The massive gated cemetery, in fact, had been created in the 1860s, partly to protect against medical predators. By 1902, Crown Hill had 24-hour security. So, guards with revolvers would roam the grounds, walking between a series of call boxes that required them to check in at different corners of the cemetery every 20 minutes. Guards were permitted to gun down prowlers on the spot. Rufus Cantrell and several accomplices ultimately received 10 years at the Jeffersonville Penitentiary, but Cantrell was soon transferred to Michigan City. As a black man, it's not surprising that he went to jail, even as his white employer, Dr. Alexander, got off the hook. Incriminating testimony from a fellow ghoul against the doctor was judged invalid since he was said to have come to court intoxicated. Wow. Cantrell's much debated mental state kept Dr. Alexander safe, though it did not keep Cantrell himself out of prison. Not everybody in the white community was happy about Joseph Alexander's acquittal. At a country crossroads in Hamilton County, still called Fisher's Station in those days, a crowd of angry farmers rioted in April of 1903. Ghouls had been active in the vicinity. Half of the coffins exhumed from graveyards around Fisher's had been reported empty. Cantrell, in fact, testified that the bodies nabbed in Noblesville were floated down the White River to Broad Ripple on boats. The crowd, setting effigies of Dr. Alexander and the Marion County judge on fire, only stopped when they almost burned down the local train station. Excuse me. That came out of nowhere. Sorry. Rufus Cantrell did not serve his full sentence at Michigan City. He was out by 1909. Rumors circulated that he'd begun writing a book about his resurrectionist days, which must have struck fear into Hoosier criminal rings, since he'd already weighed in on several local murders during his lengthy trial. Prosecutors, though, couldn't be sure if he was lying to get time off of his sentence. So while out on parole, Cantrell was working at the American Steel and Wire Company in Anderson, Indiana. This is in 1809. The press even thought he was getting ready to go on stage as a vaudeville performer. Wow. That year, he worked to drum up support among African Americans for Democratic mayoral candidate Joseph E. Bell, who won the election in Indianapolis that year. Bell, who was mayor during World War I, established the city's first vice squad. On Christmas Eve in 1915, the Indianapolis News reported that Cantrell had been charged with operating an illegal liquor den, but had fled the city to become an evangelist in Michigan. The paper claimed that Cantrell had, quote, conducted a revival, unquote, under an assumed name in Flint, Michigan. That December, just over the river from Detroit, he married a woman in Windsor, Ontario, who claimed to be Canadian. Major May McConnell, his new wife, was an officer in a religious mission called the Charity Army of America. The U.S. government, however, suspecting fraud, considered deporting her as an undesirable alien. Her half-brother was also known to police as a safe blower. Michigan police closed down the suspicious charity operation and arrested an accomplice of Cantrell's for assault and battery. Arrested for larceny himself, it was at this point that he apparently went back to showmanship again. In 1900, Carrie T. Selvage, a rich Indianapolis woman suffering from a major nervous breakdown, was rumored to have escaped from Indianapolis's Union States Hospital. Originally the Indianapolis Orphan Asylum in 1333 North Capitol Avenue, this place offered private treatment of mental and nervous diseases. Cantrell told Detroit detectives that during a grave robbing operation, Selvage showed up at the cemetery gate, frightening his gang of ghouls. She stood there, in her nightgown and felt slippers, her disheveled hair streaming out in a cold March wind, looking like a banshee. He abducted Selvage, held her in a basement, killed her, then sold her body to Indiana Medical College. Or so he said. The Michigan court said he's lying. 20 years later, the Selvage murder was still an unsolved mystery. Yet a shocking twist came in April of 1920 when her skeleton showed up in the attic of the old hospital, part of which had been converted into a garage. Workers doing renovations discovered the body. Selvage's skeleton, the skull fallen off, was sitting up against a wall. Her brothers recognized her clothing, exactly the apparel Cantrell said she was wearing at the graveyard. Cantrell had given this testimony in Detroit in 1916. Investigators, nevertheless, judged that Selvage had crawled up into the attic and frozen to death, her body undiscovered since 1900. And that's the story I believe too. The former robber turned evangelist did go to jail again for frisking the pockets of a gospel praise group in Detroit. He became a pickpocket to his fellow peeps. He was trying to be an evangelist, and he's pickpocketing people of the congregation. Oh, wow. Cantrell and accomplice Eldridge Gotti got 2 years at Marquis Penitentiary in the Upper Peninsula. What became of him after 1916 is another unsolved mystery. It's it's highly probable that he died in jail on the shores of Lake Superior. Wow. What a guy. Really? He's this grave robber, then he's trying to become an evangelist. He's in the papers all the time. He was, during, I can't believe all these tales being spun. Like, it's crazy. This man was crazy. And so was the court system. Like, I am at a loss for words. Like, when I was doing research on this, I couldn't stop reading about him. And I got to admit, like, it shook me. The story shook me to my core. I was just in shock. Like, this really happened in Indianapolis? Like, I could see it happening, like, in Hollywood or someplace like that, but Indianapolis, this happened there. It shocked me. It also shocked me that I had never heard of this before, and I thought I knew all the creepy crap that happened in Indiana, but I had never heard of this before. And so, what a story. They should make a movie about this. Holy cow. Like, there's enough in this to make a whole series out of this guy. Like, oh my goodness, it's just crazy. It's crazy. Well, thank you for listening to my story. I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, it's called the Rufus Cantrell Scandal. He was known as the king of the ghouls, and the reason why they called them ghouls was because, they would go into graveyards and they were stealing bodies and whatnot. So that's why they called them ghouls. It's crazy. This story just, wow. Okay, so enough about that. So that's going to end it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Spooky Marshmallow, and remember, stay spooky, my friends.